All right, Matt, in this week in MMA, we're going to get ready for UFC Moscow recap. We're also going to preview Bellator 234, UFC São Paulo, and we're going to get into our favorite segment of the show, the Twitter Purge. You're not going to want to miss that. So let's get into it. Alright, and welcome to another episode of This Week in MMA. As always, one half of your hosting duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at CraigAllenFNP, joined as always by Matt. You can find him on Twitter and Instagram at MattAllenFNP. Matt, you got to get on that Instagram page. And listen, we've got a great episode of This Week in MMA. So if you're not familiar with the show, maybe you found us through some of the 2-minute predictions we had. Listen, a full lineup of UFC Moscow predictions that came out last week. A little salty in the results.
Didn't do great.
Did not do great, but listen, we got a great week coming up. I mean, UFC São Paulo, it's one of those cards that might just well fly under the radar. I know it's an ESPN Plus card, but you got a great main event with Jan Blachowicz taking on Jacare Souza, and I'm looking forward to it. It is a pretty good card.
First of all, shout out to whoever made the poster. Some UFC posters are just terrible, but I actually really like this one, so good job to whoever their artist is. But yeah, I actually am looking forward to this card, and it feels like one of those cards, every time you feel like there's going to be a bad UFC card, or you think that, oh, this card's not all that great, there's always 5 or 6 fights that really blow the doors off. So it's never worth sitting one out. You should always watch no matter what.
And another thing, too, if you're just following along with some of those main card predictions, and listen, we see the comments, we reply to a lot of the comments, or as many as we can, but some of the things that pop up every time are, hey, you guys are wrong. Or you'll go back 2 or 3 weeks and say, hey, you got that one wrong. I know.
Yeah,
I know.
Happens.
That's fine. Water off a duck's back. But the point is, one of the bigger comments that we get is the fact that, hey, why don't you delve into the prelim fights? This is that opportunity where you're going to get to hear us go pretty deep into some of these prelim fights and offer our analysis and, you know, talk about some of the odds and whatnot, because there are a lot of good fights on the UFC São Paulo prelims. We're also going to get into Bellator 234. It's a half decent card. Another one in Israel, which is, it's good to see. I like the fact that Bellator is really trying to establish a base in Israel. They typically go there about twice a year. In Tel Aviv this week. It's on a Thursday, which is kind of odd.
There's 97 fights on the card. That does take away from it a little bit.
And I want to say, too, I talked to Olga Rubin before she fought Julia Budd in her title shot, and the thing that I said was, do you see a lot of talent kind of growing in Israel? Is this a good thing to see? And she said, well, not so much. Like, I don't see a ton of it. But if you look at this card, there's a lot of Israeli fighters on here. There's a lot of fighters. Like, Adam Koresh is one of those guys. He's only 3-0 right now. He's going to be fighting, or he fought Kirill Sadelnikov in his last fight, who was Baby Fedor. A lot of people might recognize that name. So there are some decent movers and shakers in Israeli MMA. Olga Rubin also being one of them. I know she lost her last fight, but she's only 6-1. She's really early in her career. And it should be a good one there. So, Matt, the way that this show is going to work today, we're going to get into the Twitter Purge, then we're going to recap UFC Moscow, and then we're going to preview the week that is, and we've got plenty of other fight cards other than just Bellator and UFC coming up this week that we're really interested in. Some of those fights we're going to pick and choose. So, Matt, unless there's something that you wanted to throw in here right now, we're going to get into my favorite segment of the show, the Twitter Purge.
It's time for the Twitter Purge.
All right, Matt, it is time for the Twitter Purge. And listen, this is my favorite segment of the show, because what we do in this section is we go through just kind of the biggest news from the week on social media. Typically, we stick with the theme of being on Twitter, but we actually got an Instagram post here this week. But it's more or less look through the lens of social media, going through some of the bigger topics of the week. And listen, normally we put these episodes out on a Tuesday or Wednesday. We get the benefit where it's Remembrance Day here in Canada, and we get Monday off. So we get a better chance to go through some of the news of the week. And listen, over this past weekend, I was busy over, as the guys on Between the Links, you can find me there tonight, but as the guys would say, Craig's weekend in New England. And listen, I have weekends in New England. They happen about once every 2 to 3 months. And one of the border guards, when I crossed into the States, asked me that question. How often do you come over? And he was serious. I said, listen, every 2 or 3 months, just to cover those events, but we go over quite often to the States. Now, point being, I went over on Friday. I was very busy on Saturday. I missed this card.
I did not, though.
The UFC Moscow card, I'm going to watch it later on this afternoon. I've seen the highlights. I've seen some of the fights as well, so I can offer some decent analysis. But the fact of the matter was, it was on during the afternoon in the Eastern time zone. And the other thing, too, I have Fight Pass to watch it up here in Canada. So I have Fight Pass and I have TSN. But when you go over into the States, those do not work with those fights. You had to have ESPN Plus, and yeah, I could sign up for a free trial and try and watch it while I was eating lunch, but it's just such a hassle. It really sucks that you can't. It's not just all in one. But anyway, the fact of the matter is, in our main event, kind of the way that Matt and I predicted it.
Yeah, kind of.
Zabit, yikes. I mean, he put on a good performance in the first 2 rounds. He slowed in the 3rd round.
We've heard that story before.
That's been his UFC kind of tenure. And he talked about a possible infection before the fight. That's why they had to keep it.
Here's my thing.
That's why they had to move it to Russia. Then they had to keep it a 3-round main event, which is kind of weird. Matt said if it was a 5-round, Kattar would have won. I know you picked Kattar, and I'm not picking on you.
Even that's the thing. It's not even just the Kattar fight. If any Zabit fight is 5 rounds, whether he fights Max Holloway or Darren Elkins, he's gonna lose. That's the thing. I don't think you can give him a title shot without seeing him actually fight a 5-round fight beforehand. Like, you look at guys like Brian Ortega, guys like the Korean Zombie. They've had 5-round fights, and yes, they might not win all of them, but at least you know what they look like in that 20th and 25th minute. We don't know that about Zabit. Right now, we know that he's really good for about 7 minutes, and then he's really good at backpedaling for the next 7.5 minutes, and that's pretty much every Zabit fight. He damages his opponent just enough so the 3rd round doesn't really matter all that much, because if you inflict a lot of damage, then their cardio won't be as good either. But I mean, Calvin Kattar was landing good shots in the 2nd. And it was about the midway through the 2nd round. Calvin Kattar started to get, found his range a little bit, started landing good shots. Hit Zabit once right behind the ear that I thought might have hurt him, but it didn't. And then, in the 3rd round, it was just a lot of Calvin Kattar moving forward, not cutting off the cage well enough, and then Zabit would just circle out, get back to the middle, and they did that for the next 5 minutes. So it was a really weird fight, and I understand why Zabit does want the title shot, but if you look, let's look at the top 15. It's Ryan Hall, Arnold Allen, Mirsad Bektic, Shane Burgos, Calvin Kattar, Josh Emmett, Jeremy Stevens, Nato Moicano, Chen Sung Jung, Yair Rodriguez, Zabit, Frank Yeager, Aldo, Ortega, and Volkanovski. He's beat 2 of those guys. I didn't even think he beat Jeremy Stevens. So he's beat 1 guy in the top 10 and 2 guys in the top 15. I don't think he deserves a title shot off that. And I really don't think he deserves a title shot against the winner of Volkanovski and Holloway. 2 guys known for their exceptional cardio who can really take advantage of the holes in Zabit's game.
What I had said before this fight took place, whether Zabit won or not, well, no. If Zabit won, it was going to be either the loser of Holloway-Volkanovski or he fights the winner of Ortega and Korean Zombie. And I still believe that. I think he should fight the winner of Ortega, Korean Zombie. I think that's more likely. Fight. Make that a 5-round fight night main event, and there you go. That gives you a chance to see what Zabit has. And you look at a guy like Ortega, he can go 5 rounds. You look at a guy like Korean Zombie, can definitely go 5 rounds. So that makes a lot of sense. And I would heavily favor either Ortega or Korean Zombie in that fight
those guys.
For the fact of the cardio. I mean, it just really, really makes you wonder. And I know it's a smart move. You win in a main event, call out, for the title. It makes a lot of sense, but it just doesn't seem like a fight to me that's likely to happen.
I feel like more people are starting to see it the way that we are too. And not to discredit him, and I know that we've voiced this in the past, but when Joe Rogan kind of attaches to a fighter and hypes them up, that fighter, the UFC tries to promote them more because they know he's going to talk about them on the podcast and whatnot. And Zabit was one of those guys who he hitched to his trailer immediately. And then a lot of, and lack of a better term, casual fans were like, oh, Zabit's going to be the next champion right away. But as we've seen Zabit in his last 2 fights, it's been the exact same story. Looks really good for about 8 minutes, and then looks really bad for about 7. And until we see him in that 4th and 5th round, I don't think you can put him in a 5-round title fight. Because I don't know if Zabit knows this, but he can't just ask for every fight to be 3 rounds. If you want to be a champion, you're going to fight 5 rounds eventually.
And we'll get more into UFC Moscow as well in our recap and preview type of segment, but that was kind of the biggest bit of news that came out of this past weekend. It was a fairly decent card. I know it gained quite a bit of traction on social media, and surprisingly for us, the busiest video was the Kattar and Zabit prediction. A lot of people really getting into it. A lot of people siding with Zabit, and you can tell that fan base is definitely there. So maybe it's not too far-fetched that you throw him into the title picture. He's definitely there already, but I think he needs that tune-up. And I say tune-up, but he needs a 5-round fight.
Craig, do you know what Max Holloway does to Zabit Magomedsharipov? He hits him 900 times, and the doctor has to stop.
Or Volkanovski just cardio king and wrestles.
Exactly. He doesn't have a good matchup right now going forward. He either has to fight Yair Rodriguez, who A year ago, I would have said Zabit beats Yair, but after the Korean Zombie fight, and especially after the Jeremy Stevens one where he just beat the brakes off him, you can't tell me Zabit should be the favorite over Yair Rodriguez. They fight very similar, but Yair has incredible cardio compared to Zabit, and he hits a lot harder. That's the thing with Zabit too, and not to get too fired up, because I know we're going to talk about it later. Zabit throws a lot of really nice strikes. There's not a crazy amount of power behind them, though. He's not like a guy like Max Holloway can't really knock out with one punch, but again, he's going to hit you 400 times, and that's just going to be an accumulation. Zabit's going to hit you a lot, but it doesn't really amount to all that much damage. He is really he's more of a grappler than he is a striker, even though his striking is very flashy. So it'd be really interesting to see where he does go moving forward.
And he's definitely a marketable guy, and there's a lot of fun in his fights. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Now, Matt, a lot of people are not going to like this, but the biggest fight, numbers-wise,
I didn't watch it.
This past weekend, KSI and Logan Paul, and I can say that I had to zone. I was in the States. It was after NEF 41. I tuned in and I threw out, everybody was tweeting, oh, this sucks. Lance Pugmire, which I was kind of surprised, he was in attendance and he's a boxing purist. You know Lance, guys like Lance, Kevin Ioli, Dan Roffel, like guys that you recognize in the boxing world, some of the best minds out there and the best journalists. You look at Lance's tweets and he was saying, KSI on his way to the ring, and I'm paraphrasing, but at the end of every tweet, it was ... Like, he really wasn't a fan of it. And it was weird because it was a 6-round boxing fight and a main event as a pro fight. And then before that, you had 12-round fights like you normally see. It was just odd. Then, before the fight happened, there was a swing bout that they just threw in there. It was, and both guys, and yeah, they both kind of looked like knockoff Logan Pauls and KSIs. It was weird.
I think the real story of this is that Billy Joe Saunders looked terrible until he won. That's the one fight I went back and watched. Billy Joe Saunders was losing that fight, and his corner told me he had to finish it. And credit to him, in that 11th round, he just came out and looked like he was living in the Matrix. But up until then, he looked awful. And right now, all the rumors are, and it is starting to look like Billy Joe Saunders is going to fight Canelo Alvarez at some point in the spring. If you're Billy Joe Saunders, I hope you eat all the tainted horse meat. I hope you do them steroids. Because Canelo Alvarez is going to hurt him.
I just want to say, as far as the tweet is concerned that we have up on the screen, it currently has just under 211,000 likes. Like, you'd send a tweet out and you just click your Twitter analytics and you'd have 1,000, 2,000 impressions. It was... The numbers for this on social media just went through the charts. And I know a lot of people show the video, the guy with the rimmed glass is just losing his mind between, I think it was the first and second or second and third round. But there was a lot of hype going into this fight. And listen, you might be a boxing purist. You might not enjoy this. I sent out a tweet, and it's hard to disagree here. This is the best type of thing that boxing can have.
I disagree so much it's not even funny.
Fights like this, fights like Mayweather-McGregor, it just brings eyes into a sport that there's more boxing fans than MMA fans out there. MMA fans might be surprised. There's a ton of boxing purists, boxing fans, boxing people that are out there. Little freak fights like this are going to help Eddie Hearn. They're going to help the promoters. They're going to put a lot of money into a lot of people's pockets. And you looked at the purses for this fight, and in your co-main, they were pretty darn close to what KSI and Logan Paul were making. It can't hurt to have fights like this that are just going to boost numbers for boxing.
I think it does, and I'll say this. There's a reason that Paige Van Zandt can headline a Fox card, but not a pay-per-view. Because the fans who want to watch Paige Van Zandt fight and why she's so popular aren't the fans who are going to pay the $60 for a pay-per-view. Same thing. The fans who are going to watch this are not going to pay money to watch an actual boxing fight. They're watching this for the names in the main event. They're not watching it for the contest that's being held.
The only thing I would say, and I would disagree with you there, those fans for sure would have spent the money on YouTube. And you heard from Paul and KSI after the fact. They either lost money or they could have made more money doing something else. But they had that fight on YouTube, which really set the tone. And yeah, KSI already had a fight against a smaller name YouTuber in the UK before he fought Logan Paul. But then when they had this fight, it was under Matchroom. It was in the States. It was also on DAZN in the States, Canada, all over the place. So you had to have that subscription. You had to go out of your way to get it. And I'm sure there's a free trial out there, and there are a lot of people that signed up for it. But it just attracts a different set of eyes, and you could certainly introduce new fans to boxing through this that maybe wouldn't have ever watched boxing before.
I agree, but those fans who watched this that one time, they're not going to come back. They only watched it for the names in the main event. They did not care about the sport. These guys could have done Olympic Games against each other, and it would have drawn similar numbers. I don't think that the reason this was so big was because it was a boxing match. I think it was because of the two personalities who were involved in the main event. So I genuinely don't think that the fact that it was boxing really changed anything.
It's gonna
I don't think either one of us are right or wrong in this. I don't feel like the people who watch this for a boxing fight are going to go out and watch Andy Ruiz versus Anthony Joshua too.
And the thing that really sucks, and you know, there's people out there that are saying that this was high level boxing. Matt, you didn't watch it. I watched this.
I watched highlights, and they just move their arms like.
I watched amateur MMA. 14 amateur MMA fights. Went back to the hotel, watched 2 or 3 pro boxing fights, and then I watched this. There's better strikers in amateur MMA than these two guys. I also want to say that if you watch a 12-round boxing fight of legit actual boxers, especially title fights in boxing, those guys are night and day with these guys.
Yeah, like, okay, in a few weeks, we're going to see Deontay Wilder fight King Kong Ortiz, and that's going to be as good, like, of course, Wilder doesn't have the best technique, but still, that's as good of skilled boxers as you can possibly get, and then you watch this, and it's just, like you said, it's night and day.
Like, the referee in the second and third rounds, you know, specifically, had to tell them, like, you can't clinch, you can't do that, like, you can, but you can't. Like, this is how you fight. That shouldn't happen in a fight, and maybe we'll get a trilogy bout, who knows, but hopefully not. And if we move forward, another one of those organizations that we follow quite closely is KSW. They put on KSW 51 from Croatia. Kind of some neat stuff from there. I mean, you saw Mirko Krokov go up, fake way in. He was also in the cage to kind of pump up the fans.
They played Wild Boys before they showed him on camera. That's always good.
That was pretty cool. A lot of really good fights on this card. You can see up on the screen right now, I mean, Rakic becoming inaugural bantamweight champ. He's one of those guys that I could see having quite a high ceiling, even outside of KSW. I was kind of disappointed in the main event. I mean, you had Pudzianowski taking on Erko Yun. Pudzianowski getting a TKO finish there. Well, there's some other things from KSW that kind of surprised you. I mean, the fights were half decent, but I don't know. I mean, it didn't have kind of that aura that we've seen from some other KSW cards.
We say it all the time. They're like the pride of Europe. It's not your traditional MMA kind of organization in a sense. They do they really play into the showmanship kind of, and it's a lot of fun to watch. But yeah, it didn't really have that big card feel like some of the cards in the past have.
And some of the fights were a little odd. I mean, you had fights pop up and drop off on short notice. I mean, we're looking at the card right now. Sebastian Przerbisz, Christian Kazabowski, Roman Zizmansky. These are guys that you might recognize if you're a big KSW fan. You had some Croatian fighters like Ivan Erslan, Ante Delija. I mean, those are recognizable guys. And then you just go up to the top. I mean, Daniel Torres is a guy that we've talked about quite a bit. Rakic fought UFC vet Damian Stasiak. I mean, a decent name there. Vaso Bakasevic took on Boris Mankovsky. Mankovsky's quite good. Wasn't able to beat Norman Park, but still. And then you had Pudzianowski-Yun. The one weird thing to me in the fight that I just kind of wanted to talk about briefly, the D'Elia fight against Ollie Thompson. You might know Thompson.
Ollie Thompson fought in the UFC.
He did. He was like on 2 or 3 days' notice in that fight. The other guy that I was looking at with a win, if he was able to win, maybe like a future UFC guy, Alexander Illich, the Joker. At 185, he was 12-2 going into the fight. He was on a nice little win streak. He had 5 in a row before that. The only loss to Amilcar Alves, and then he had 1 in his debut. But this is a guy that was finishing fights, doing really well, and he got finished by a second round rear naked choke. Cesare Kasich was able to get the win there. He's 10-0 now. So just kind of some surprises there from KSW. Another one of those cards that didn't really pop on social media. I saw a lot of clips floating around on Saturday, but kind of underwhelming, and there was some name value there too.
There really was, like you said. Definitely not one of the bigger cards, but KSW is just so much fun to watch. Even if it is a card that doesn't have a lot of name recognition, it's always worth giving it a check. So, and their next one, KSW 52, being headlined by former middleweight champion Mehmet Khalidov, who's an awful lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it should be a good one. You always have to look forward to what they're going to have. Their next card is going to come at you from Gliwice in Poland, so that's always good. And some fights that are already announced. You've got, Damian Jankowski taking on Szymon Kalecki. your Olympians, battle of Olympians. You got Scott Ashcombe, Ahmed Khalidov.
Fun fight.
It says at 187. That's kind of odd. You've got Saladin Palnas taking on Ivan Buchinger.
You're gonna want to watch that.
That should be a good one. I mean, Palnas looks like legit.
Palnas, he's a monster.
Just to kind of focus and give a bit of the shine for KSW, they put on a good event this past weekend, and looking forward to the next one. Now today,
we're speaking,
it's going on as we're speaking, but The Rock's on the Ariel Helwani show. Matt, you're not going to like that. But just kind of like the Logan Paul KSI to boxing, having The Rock around MMA is never a bad thing, right?
No, exactly. And the fact that they had him in such a large part of this event, I mean, he came out before the weigh-ins, he walked in with the belt, and they did the whole thing. He held the belt out, and he promoted the fight a lot by himself, too. I know he had talked about it. That's what he tried to do, bring a lot more eyes to the sport. And the fact that he's kind of like, he hitched his wagon to Jorge Masvidal, and he's going to start going to all of his fights. I agree in this sense that part's good for the sport, because I felt like the event that they put around The Rock, the event that they included The Rock in was very kind of WWE-ish. It was very easy for a casual fan to be like, oh, I know who Nate Diaz is. I probably saw the Jorge Masvidal highlight knockout of Ben Askren. This is a fight that I would actually watch. And since the event was so good, like that main card was one of the best main cards of the year. Every fight was amazing. The main event, I know it ended somewhat controversially, but it was still a phenomenal fight. Like, it gave you everything you could have ever asked for. So the fact that a lot more casual fans probably were drawn to that fight. And the good thing about that, too, is if you're a casual fan who likes Nate Diaz or Conor McGregor, you might only watch a fight once every year because that's how often they fight. Jorge Masvidal fights all the time. So all those viewers who now like Jorge Masvidal...
All the time now.
All the time now. But Jorge Masvidal traditionally, I know he took that year off, but traditionally Jorge Masvidal was a fairly active fighter. So... hopefully he can kind of keep that going, fight for a title relatively soon. That'd be very nice. And I do agree that The Rock being there was a very good thing for the sport.
The thing that I like, too, is he's not just an appealing type of character for the casual fans. He's going after that hardcore base, too, because he announced that he's going to be working on a project following the Mark Kerr documentary, making it into a movie with himself.
Such a sad documentary.
It's pretty neat to see that The Rock would really make kind of a deep dive like that.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not like a name like... pick one off a wall, like a Conor McGregor.
It's like he's doing a Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz thing. He picked kind of, not really an obscure name. Like, you're a really hardcore fan, you know who Mark Kerr is, and you probably watched the documentary. But, really good on him. It's kind of cool, too, to see, like... To say the most famous person in the world is kind of an exaggeration, but he's definitely in that sort of conversation. To really be such a big MMA fan and talk about it a lot and give a lot more eyes onto the sport, it's a really good thing.
Yeah, and looking forward to it. I'm sure there's going to be more tidbits and different quotes that are going to come out of this interview with Ariel Helwani, but it's just interesting to note and mention and move along with it. Now, I said we were going to go with something that was over on Instagram. You get Darren Till's Instagram in front of you, and the two pictures there's 3 in total, and one video. Darren Till training with Tyson Fury. Now, I know Tyson Fury talked about it with Sky Sports. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, the fact that Tyson Fury might try and get it into a little foray in MMA and train with Conor McGregor, but somebody took him up on that offer in Liverpool's own Darren Till, especially a guy coming off a big win a couple of weeks ago. Listen, nothing's set in stone. No contracts are signed. Does this add fuel to the fire that maybe Tyson Fury ends up in MMA?
Contractually, he's not allowed to fight in MMA because he's a boxer and he currently has a lot of boxing obligations, so he's not allowed to fight in MMA. But I feel like this is just getting his name out there, especially that did get a lot of attention when he was like, I could transition to MMA.
Yeah.
Exactly. So now that there's video coming out of him actually training with Darren Till, who a lot of people do recognize, it's a good thing for his personal brand, but he's never going to fight in MMA.
You got to look at it this way. He's doing this MMA stuff with Darren Till, but he's also in the ring in WWE, feuding with Braun Strowman, coming out of the cage too.
He beat Braun Strowman.
Hey, beat Braun Strowman. Like this guy's really elevating his brand and doing a great job of it, and cross promoting on different platforms. So it's pretty interesting to see.
And it's really good to grow his personal brand because he's fighting Wilder in the spring if Wilder beats Ortiz, which I'm assuming he will. So you have a guy who now has WWE fans, he has MMA fans, and of course he's a massive name in boxing anyways, fighting probably the most popular North American boxer currently. So that fight's just going to be so big it's not even funny. Good for Tyson Fury. He's gone through such a roller coaster these past couple of years, and it's really nice to see that finally, like, there's some sort of stability into his life, and he's just kind of blown up into this massive superstar. Because he is, like, you really want your athletes, everyone wants their athletes to have personality and be kind of that bigger than life person. That's exactly what Tyson Fury is. I mean, he's got the voice of an angel. He's a perfect, not perfect boxer, but he's this amazing boxer. He only puts on fun fights. He's fun on the mic. So really good for Tyson Fury.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how 2019 ends for him and the start of 2020. A lot of big things in his future. We continue on. Some news that kind of popped out in the last 24 hours or so. Cris Cyborg still wants Amanda Nunes rematch in Bellator vs. UFC cross-promotion fight. That one by MMA Junkie. Were you surprised to hear this?
No, not at all, because this is what Cyborg does. Cyborg's boyfriend either tweets out, A, what's your favorite movie? Please put underneath. Or calls someone out who she's not going to get a fight with.
It's interesting to me because she already has a title fight booked for January against Julia Budd over in Bellator. And it's easy to call it Amanda Nunes now. I mean, you're in different promotions, so it's pretty easy to do. I was kind of surprised because the likelihood's very, very slim. UFC doesn't need to promote Bellator. Bellator needs UFC,
But that's not even it. She could have had this fight. All she had to do was re-sign with the UFC for 2 more fights, and then she could have been able to do the Amanda Nunes fight. If you lose that, just do another one, then go to Bellator. That's all you had to do. Like, this fight was easy for her. Amanda Nunes needs opponents because she just beats everyone so easily, and Cyborg's by far the biggest name opponent that she could have in the future. So Cyborg could have had this fight. So there's no sense for you to call for this thing that's never going to happen if you could have had that fight anyways.
Put your name out there, just like the Tyson Fury stuff.
Exactly.
People were talking about it.
Shoot or shoot, but
it had to work. Now, Matt, we're going to go a different way here. So it's not necessarily the Twitter way, but hey, we were in Maine over the weekend. I covered NEF 41 from Aura in Portland. The promotion announced that they're going to have another event coming up in February the 8th. And it's going to be a different look. They're going to go to a concert hall. It looks like a great venue, actually. And in NEF 40, they were at UMaine, so on campus. It was kind of a similar vibe. You're up on the stage. It was a concert hall. It was a really, really nice venue, and they put on a great show there. From this past weekend, there were 2 pro fights that were scratched from the card. Josh Harvey, that you might recognize, 7-0-1, that one draw against Joe Giannetti from The Ultimate Fighter Season 27. So Josh's fight was nixed because his opponent, Hines, took a fight like 2 weeks before this, and he wasn't medically cleared because you have to have 60 days between fights, so he couldn't get cleared by the commission. So there were still 4 title fights on this. I'll just breeze through some of the live results, so you can check those out, fightnightpicks.net. You always see it going along in the bottom. Amateur flyweight title fight, Nate Boucher getting the submission win there in the first round. You had a good fight between Zach Richard and Mike Murray, and Mike Murray in his last 2, because he's only had 2 amateur fights, looked effing amazing. And this is a guy that he's stationed, I believe, in Georgia. Came back for the fight here, and it was a good one. But Zach Richard just went back to his base of wrestling and put on a great performance. I had it 49-46. The judges scored it 48-47 for Richard, a little bit closer. Cam Arnold absolutely stunned Walt Shea. Left hook knockout, retains his bantamweight belt. That was the only one that wasn't vacant. And in her main event, Glory Watson actually dropped her first fight. She was 6-0 going into it. She had a really, really close fight against Kari Hill in her last one. I actually, scored the fight for Hill. Watson was able to get the win. Fought Kara Greenwell coming out from Oklahoma, who looked amazing, actually. Her in and out, her movement, she kept Watson backed up against the cage, who really couldn't find her combos and her distance. Greenwell for sure won the fight. I had it scored 49-46. One judge had it 50-45. The other 2, 48-47. But the biggest news that came out of this week, and it hasn't really kind of hit the airwaves and gotten around on social media. The promotions kind of talked about it. I pinned it on my Twitter, so you can find it there at Craig Allen FNP. But they announced it, and I saw this, so I'll back up. So when I go to these events, I show up about an hour early. I've already got my write-up ready. I put my computer there. I usually ask, can I get an outlet to plug my computer in on my phone? And I get to work, and I take pictures, and I add the thumbnail, and I do some stuff on my phone. It's a lot of multitasking when I go to these smaller events. And I'm right up against the cage, like you can see. But I show up that early because sometimes the rules meetings, they go a little bit late. You kind of pick up on some questions. Sometimes if there's fighters or people that are sitting kind of like VIP, you can kind of pick them out and try and gauge what's going to go on. So I see this guy, and he kind of goes up by the cage. He doesn't really get in. He stands up at the top. People are taking pictures, and I thought, oh, okay, like I don't really recognize this guy. I kind of do, but I don't. So he goes and he sits down, and then I check Facebook, and there's a notification. What's UFC vet Josh Grispi doing in the house? And I thought, I know Josh Grispi. Where do I know that name? So I looked him up. He fought Dustin Poirier. Then he fought George Roop. Then he fought my boy, Ronnie Yaya, and then he fought Andy Ogle, and he lost all those 4 fights. But it's interesting because he was supposed to fight Jose Aldo, and the very first UFC featherweight title bout didn't happen. Aldo couldn't make it, so he fought Dustin Poirier and lost the unanimous decision. But before that, he was on a hell of a run. He's 14-1. I mean, big wins over big names. Even Micah Miller and LC Davis at the time were pretty big wins. And then lost 4 straight. And then he was sentenced in 2017 to 5.5 years in jail for assault, gun charges. There was a little bit of drug possession in there as well. So we haven't seen him fight since, 2013. He's been away for a long time. Now he's going to be taking on Bruce Boynton, who you might recognize, current CES champ. Fought for NEF in the past. He was a champ there as well. His record isn't great, but he's fought really good competition in the past. Guys like Andre Harrison, for example. But he's Desmond Green as well. Just names off the top of my head. But Bruce Boynton's a guy. He's from Bangor, Maine. You've got Josh Grispi coming in from Massachusetts. I'm just surprised that they've kind of strapped a rocket to this.
What was the first thing I texted you when you sent me a screenshot of the fact that Josh Grispi's fighting in this? I said, what a weird thing to promote.
Yeah,
it doesn't make a lot of... It's not even like the Greg Hardy thing where, like, at least Greg Hardy's really popular. Josh Grispi's A, not that popular. B, and I don't think this is a controversial thing to say, it's an awful human being. So, like, it's just a weird thing for them to promote so heavily.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at some of the things here. Like, one of the DAs in the case said domestic violence cases are difficult to prosecute and involve a particularly vulnerable set of victims, and this case was no different. This was a severe case of abuse, not only the physical injuries Mr. Grispi inflicted, but the emotional abuse, isolating the victim from family. It's really tough, and people deserve second chances in certain circumstances.
This isn't one of them.
It's just weird to see, and I know, Josh Grispi, his talents weren't fighting. It's just not a good look.
Bruce, if you're watching the show, we'll send you a t-shirt. Like, let us know.
We can't do that.
Okay, actually, we can't do that because we're MMA, but...
I am.
You are. It's a fun main event because you do kind of have... Not really prestige. I really don't even know how to describe it. Like, you do have a guy, and it's always nice for a small organization to say, like, former UFC fighter, but this really isn't the guy who you want to be using for that. Like, there's plenty of other former UFC stars you could probably get to do this.
It was awkward, too, because, and I took the picture, and I was like, whoa, this is weird, because Grispi was off. You can kind of see where he is, kind of like close to the red corner. He was back in the corner, sitting there. Boynton was behind where that screen is. He was seated there. They were pretty close. So they go into the cage and they kind of rip a promo. And Bruce Boynton, because again, I'm trying to take these pictures and type this out as quick as I can, but I know he mentioned something about, this guy put his hands on women, whatever. Like, it was just awkward, like really weird. So it's going to be interesting to see if this fight materializes, if it lasts until February and these guys actually step into the cage and fight, because both fighters are relatively high level. I mean, yeah, you could say, Boynton, he's 6 fights above 500, but he has fought decent competition. And Josh Grispi, yeah, he did fight in the UFC, but it's just not a good look.
And this is my question for you. Do you actually see this catching on to not just the casual audience, but catching on outside of kind of like NEF's core market? Because I'm sure it'll get sort of that controversy wave due to the fact that Grispi is fighting again, but how do you see this being marketed and promoted in a positive light, if there is any?
You just say that it's a UFC vet. And you just hammer down the fact that this is a guy that fought in the UFC. This is a guy that fought Dustin Poirier, because that's a recognizable name. And maybe you throw in Mark Hominick, and he beat a former champion, Jens Pulver. And that's kind of how you leave it. And I mean, Jens Pulver to me is one of those guys that should be in the UFC Hall of Fame and isn't. But still, it's just, to me, like, personally, I like, if it was me signing the contracts, I don't think I would have made this fight. It's not right to me personally. I can see why you would, because you're going to get a big push out of it. And it's also worth noting, Josh Harvey was announced to fight Carl Langston on this card. So I had already mentioned Harvey. He's 7-0-1. Langston's 0-4. So it's another one of those ones where I just scratch my head, because to me, Josh Harvey set himself up well. If I'm not mistaken, he's only had 1 fight outside of NEF, and it was that draw against Joe Giannetti. He's fought some decent fighters in the past, but I want to see him, continue to take steps up, because he's one of those guys that I could see with, 2 or 3 more wins maybe. he's the guy that ends up in Contender Series and, win or lose, whatever happens. But still, if you make it there, it really says something about how good of a fighter you are. But this is going to be the main event. If I'm not mistaken, they've said it's going to be for a title. You'd have to think that one's going to be at lightweight. But it's an incredibly controversial topic. I don't agree with the fight, but yeah, we'll see what happens. I was kind of surprised that it didn't really get around because it's one of those names that in 2017 a lot of people were talking about it.
It's quite infamous,
and he hasn't fought since 2013 due to some of these issues. So it'll be interesting to see how it moves forward. I mean, that's why we get into the Twitter purge, and that's kind of the unfortunate reality of covering some of these shows. There's some news like this that kind of comes out of it, and Josh Grispi getting a second chance here with New England Fights in 2020. So we'll see what happens there. But let us know in the comments, I guess, what you think about this one. It's an odd situation, and I'm sure it's going to start to pick up steam, and people are gonna start reading about it once we get closer to it. So yeah, that's the Twitter purge. I mean, we dove into UFC Moscow, some of the happenings out there on social media, as well as this big bit of news, I think, coming out of this weekend for Portland, Maine. So Matt, now it's time to kind of change gears. We're going to get into a recap of UFC Moscow, talk a little bit about Bellator 233, which really, really flew under the radar, and give you a preview for the week that's coming.
Fight Night Picks is brought to you by Strikeforce Energy. Head on over to the website, strikeforceenergy.com. If you enjoy the flavor of freedom, the company's veteran-owned, and everything's made in America. They've got great apparel. You can turn any 16.9-ounce beverage into an energy drink. There's no sugar, no calories, no stirring, or no shaking required. They also have a line of different products as well as Strikeforce coffee. So if I head into my cart, I've got a 4-count sample pack, I've got a 20-ounce coffee mug, and if I head into that checkout, use the promo code FNP, click to apply, and you're going to save 20% off any order. That's FNP at strikeforceenergy.com. So it's brought to you by Spretzbox. Head on over to the website, spretzbox.com. All you have to do, click to get started. You can either order one of their boxes that has over $100 in value, or maybe you're interested in a single item, like these great socks. So click on them, add them to your cart, head on over to the checkout, and then all you have to do is enter in the promo code FNP as follows here. You'll save 10% off your first box or your complete first order. That's Spretzbox.com.
All right, Matt, so it is time for a recap of last weekend. And listen, we had Bellator 233 and UFC Moscow that we were really heavily getting involved with. We had our main card predictions for Bellator 233. A lot of people were quick to point out how wrong we were with King Mo taking on Andrew Capel. And listen,
sorry, I didn't think he was going to get knocked out by a guy defending his takedown. That's my bad.
Family and friends were very upset. And yes, I know he's a high-level Muay Thai guy. His kickboxing is good as well. He trains at Team Elevation. You go on his Instagram, you see all the training partners that he has, which are, top-level people. Justin Gaethje, Neil Magny are some of the ones there. But if we just kind of look through the card here briefly, there were some pretty decent fighters on the undercard that are worth mentioning. Amanda Bell looked really good against Janae Harding. Harding's one of those people that you kind of see promoted here and there. You also look at Romero Cotton. He was the guy that was scheduled to fight at middleweight at one point, weighed in at 200 pounds, so I just wanted to mention that. Logan Storley looked great. Again, he had a corner stoppage at the end of the first round. He's one of those lay and pray Jake Shields types.
That's the thing. Okay, and you can be a wrestler and be fun to watch.
I want to say this. There was a lot made of some video of him in camp. I believe he was hitting mitts. It was with Henry Hooft at Hard Knocks 365, and he looked great. But sometimes you can make people hitting pads look. It's very deceiving.
Her name was Ronda Rousey. It happened.
It's very deceiving. Julius Anglikas, you've seen him before. You've seen him do a lot of interviews lately. Handed Jordan Young his first loss, which was not totally surprising, but I mean, Jordan Young's a guy that the promotions put a lot of push behind, so that's really interesting there as well. Finally, Tyree Fortune fought. I've been just, every time Tyrell fights, I want to see Tyree, and we haven't seen Tyree for a long time. He gets a split over Chuck Campbell in a fight that a lot of people had scored for Campbell that I had seen. Tyrell looked great
Just
against
absolutely
Zhu Anyanwu. So good win there against, UFC vet and Anyanwu. Arlene Blencoe and Leslie Smith lived up to our hype.
Show.
It was a great fight, and a lot of people actually looked into it and said, hey, Arlene Blencoe, her last, big losses were both title losses to Julia Budd in close fights.
And I know Leslie Smith came out after the fact, said that she had thought she won round 1 and 3. It was a competitive fight, but I did see it every round for Blanco. All the rounds were fairly close, but I didn't see any of them score for Smith. I thought it was a phenomenal fight, though. And that's in this women's featherweight division, even in Bellator, they're one of the few organizations that actually have a somewhat developed women's featherweight division. It only takes 2, maybe 3 wins to get a title shot, so there's a good chance we do see Blanco fight the winner of Bud and Cyborg down the road.
And I'm down for a trilogy, even though Blanco lost the other 2 fights against Bud. If that's the
even
case,
her versus Cyborg would be fun, just due to the fact that both ladies hit so Jesus hard. So it's good, really good spot for Blanco to be in.
Like we said, Capel getting the win in the co-main event against King Mo. And listen, you insert yourself right now into the top of the light heavyweight division. I mean, there's 5 or 6 guys up there, and now you're one of them. Yeah. It's similar to Jesse Mealy getting that win over Talita Nogueira that we talked about from the week before. It's a guy on the regional scene that pops up, gets a win, and automatically, hopefully for Capel, you beat a legend like King Mo. You at least get... Because the way that it normally works with Bellator, if it's a one-off like this or short notice or whatever, you just get the 1. If you get a decent win, they'll bring you back on another 1. And then if you win there, maybe you can roll it into a 3. But hopefully with this 1 win, he gets like a 3-fight deal.
And hopefully you can kind of ride this momentum too, because you're not going to get more, big-name wins than King Mo. So if you can win this and then especially get into like a big-name fight in your next one and win that one too, the sky's the limit for Capel.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And then in a main event, John Salter...
I told you
just
so.
grinding out a win over Costello Van Steenis. Again, it's just that grappling ability of Salter and the ability to get the fight to the ground. Kind of a surprise there for me. I mean, like I said,
Van Steenis came on strong near the end of it. I mean, Salter did kind of gas himself out for the first 2 rounds, but no, good win for Salter.
Good win there, and I mean, that was pretty much Bellator 233 in a nutshell. Nothing too crazy. I think really the Capel win was kind of the wild one. King Mo shot in. Capel looked to kind of defend it and just
clipped his chin and put him down.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. UFC Moscow, like I said, had the chance to go back and watch some of these fights. Now, Matt, were there any big surprise? I know Davey Grant over Popov for me was a surprise. David Zavada. A lot of people actually reached out. Good. People reached out on Instagram. People asked on YouTube what our picks were for that fight. And I said, Nurmagomedov. You look at the quality of opponent that he's fought. If I'm not mistaken, he was a favorite in that fight. Nurmagomedov, I guess. Sure. I mean, why not? Zavada didn't... he lost to Danny Roberts, and then he got finished in the fight before this. He was on a 2-fight losing streak.
It was a great submission, though. He actually looked really good. The transitions on the ground were phenomenal. Khabib was in Nurmagomedov's corner. That was fun. And then McGregor tweeted a bunch of stuff about that. But no, he looked really good in this. Co Roberson had a pretty good performance. Nothing too spectacular, though, if I'm being completely honest. There wasn't a lot to it. Rustam Khabibov had a perfect Rustam Khabibov fight, which is just go for takedowns and land your opponent for 3 rounds.
Magomed Ankalaev.
This is what we have to get to. Magomed Ankalaev basically said, Anderson Silva, Lyoto Machida, that's cool what you guys can do. It's my turn now. And he basically, it kind of reminded me of the Fabian Edwards knockout that he had from the up kick. He kind of hit him with it, jumped to his feet, and then hit him with the right hand. So Ankalaev hit him with the front kick. I don't even think the front kick, honestly, was the thing that stunned Dalcha as much as the punch right after was. But yeah, hit him with the front kick, came with the right hand afterwards, completely flatlined him. It was a really nice performance. All in all, it wasn't the best card, if I'm being completely honest. A lot of decisions, not a lot of great fights. And Rocco Martin looked pretty good.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
He did. It was one of the better performances on the card, but it's still, on a card that wasn't that great, it's not that hard to stand out. Ed Herman, we need to give a shout out to, because Ed Herman is 1,000 years old. He's 39. But he's like a fine wine.
We did say something like this could happen. Exactly. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I took Amadiev.
I took Ed Herman.
But we said Ed Herman, it's just volume. And if he's able to get into a rhythm, he can certainly edge out a win. And look at this. He's on a win streak.
And it was really nice, too, what he kept on doing. He would get the fight to the fence, and then he kept on threatening a guillotine, but he wouldn't actually jump on it. He would just kind of hold the head in a guillotine position and throw knees like there was no tomorrow. And it was just a phenomenal fight by Ed Herman. It was really nice to see. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
I want to point out, Ibrahimov, not Imadiev. But in the next fight, the Danny Roberts Imadiev fight, I had picked Imadiev, even though you look at the fight that he had before that, and I said, you got to worry, because Danny Roberts is another one of those guys that with the boxing, he could kind of eke something out. And Imadiev's fight before that, of course, a close loss to Max Griffin, who kind of sizes up well with Danny Roberts. There's a lot of similarities between the two fighters.
And Danny Roberts, it was one of those situations kind of like Carlos Condit and Dan Hardy, where they both went for left hooks, but Danny Roberts just landed first, and Imadiev just kind of went spinning afterwards. It was a phenomenal knockout. Imadiev got up and looked fine, which was really weird because he looked completely flatlined. And again, there weren't a lot of stoppages on this card, so the few that there were, they really stand out. So it was a great performance for Danny Roberts. And the next fight, Greg Hardy and Alexander Volkov. This is my thoughts on Greg Hardy, and I know we've both been hard on him, but he's had enough fights now where you kind of have to respect him as an MMA talent. I do think he beats guys in the top 15 and maybe even in the top 10, but I just don't think he's a very exciting fighter with his style. And I don't think that's very controversial to say. I know a lot of his early wins were very quick knockouts, but as you kind of look at how his skill set's developed, and this might actually be the best thing for him. Don't go in there and just try to bum rush everybody. Go in there, try to be conservative with your energy, but his right hand is such a big power weapon for him, and I know he broke it earlier on in this fight, so you can't really... It's really hard to tell, but Alexander Volkov just sort of did everything a little bit better and did enough to not get knocked out and still win. So I thought it wasn't a great performance by Volkov, who we've talked about in the past. He very much fights to the level of his competition. When he fights Fabricio Verdum, he goes out there, gets into these great scrambles, gets the fight up to the feet, and knocks him out. And when he fights guys like Roy Nelson, Timothy Johnson, Greg Hardy, he's had close fights with all those guys who definitely aren't near his skill ceiling. So, not the best fight in the world, to be completely honest. I'd like to see Greg Hardy fight maybe a Tai Tuivasa, maybe a guy who has obvious holes in their game, but is sort of a bigger name along with Volkov, because he did show in this fight, if you could not get finished by Volkov, you're doing something right.
I think there's more matchups to make for Hardy, just in general, but especially coming off of a loss, it's easier to pair him with a guy like Tuivasa, who's on a losing streak. And for Volkov, you kind of have to wonder what you do. Do you give him a Derek Lewis again? Like, what do you do with the
I know
top?
Francis Ngannou called him out on Twitter. That's a terrible fight for Alexander Volkov, and I would fake as many injuries as I could to get out of that fight, because Francis Ngannou's the last guy you'd ever want to fight. And Volkov's weird, too, because you can tell just how skilled he is by the way that he throws his shots, but there seems to be kind of this thing in some of his fights where he kind of hesitates and then he throws. He'll do everything like half a second too late almost. And you see this just basketball. I'm a big basketball fan. If you watch LeBron James pass a ball, his basketball IQ is so high that he's operating on another level. But when you look at other superstars, they'll make that pass, they'll just do it half a second too late. And I feel like that's what Volkov does. His skill set's elite, but his timing isn't there. And that's the only thing that separates him.
And we're feeding a fed horse with our main event was Zabit and Cater. So we'll just glance over that and we'll move into, kind of a preview of the week that's coming up. So we've got Bellator. It's a Thursday card from Tel Aviv, Israel. We talked about it a little bit. Just some interesting names of note on some of these prelims. We said there's a ton of fights here. Kirill Medvedovsky is one against Ahmed Fararza.
Oh, and sorry to cut you off, Craig. You mean this card starts on Thursday and ends on Saturday, right?
It very well could. There's a lot of fights. Hobson Gracie Jr. is one of those guys at 170 that you're going to recognize the name. He's very thin. He's a very, very thin fighter. He kind of, his stance reminds me a lot of Random Marcos because he has his hands kind of outstretched.
Not a stance that you want to emulate.
His striking isn't like
good.
Like, think of a grappler that you've seen recently that has half decent striking, like Damian Maia or Gilbert Burns. But Damian Maia, like a strict jiu-jitsu guy, and even then his striking's half decent. Hobson, he's only had 2 pro fights. I'm sure he's going to get better
very much
as he
still
goes.
Developing talent. But...
Yes. Vladimir Fedin taking on Adam Kresh. We talked about Kresh having a win over a guy like Sadelnikov. Now he's going after another Russian. If you look at Fedin's record, it's 15-5, but it's quite padded.
Really
so
is.
you just kind of have to watch out for that. Aviv Ghazali had a crazy submission win in his last fight, like sub 30-second. If I'm not mistaken, it was the quickest submission in Bellator history.
Yeah, it was.
And he's got another tough test here, a decent record from his opponent. You got his father, Haim, just defying time. This is a guy, long time, one of those Israeli fighters that a lot of people recognize, but a guy that trains out of Henzo's in New York as well, taking on Artur Pronin. Then you've got Austin Vanderford taking on Gracik Bozinen. I'd be interested to see if there are odds on these cards, because sometimes there's not on Bellator, sometimes there are the day of, just to see how they're going to gauge that fight. You've also got Olga Rubin, and I talked about her at the start of the show. I mean, 6-1 coming off a title shot loss. Sinead Kavanagh, her last fight in Bellator was the loss to Leslie Smith.
And it'll be interesting to see how Olga Rubin does rebound from her first loss, too, because it's kind of one of those pivotal moments in a lot of people's careers where you see they have their first loss and they either kind of like dwell on that loss or they fix all those holes and they come back really strong.
And Sinead Kavanagh's fought top talent. She looked all right in the fight against Smith. I mean, she was just late on some things. Yeah. She was on the back foot a lot just with that pressure of Smith. Be interesting to see how that fight goes. Sydney Outlaw taking on Roger Huerta. Sydney Outlaw is on a pretty darn big win streak. If I'm not mistaken, it's 5 in a row. Roger Huerta's lost 2 in a row, and he did not look good in his last 2.
His nose
against good competition, right? Like, that was just weird.
It's really weird. If you look at Roger Huerta's record in the past decade, I guess, and that's not an exaggeration, it has been a decade since Roger Huerta's been on a win streak. Sydney Outlaw is kind of the guy who he should be fighting right now. He shouldn't be fighting, the Patricky Pitbulls, the Benson Hendersons of the world. I don't think he's going to win this fight.
And in our main event, Linton Vassell on a 3-fight losing streak taking on Sergey Kharitonov. That's just a tough fight.
If I could ever guarantee you like a lock of the week, it's going to be that Sergey Kharitonov is going to beat.
So if we continue along, just going off of Bellator, then you got Fusion Fighting Championship. And this is weird because this is one of those organizations that I look to, and every now and again when the UFC goes to South America, you get a fighter off of one of these cards that you go, wait, who is this? And you look at this card, Humberto Bandenay is one of those guys that we've seen in the UFC, and he's a recognizable name as a guy who's been there and done that. He's taken on Bruno Conti, and if you've looked at Conti's record, yeah, he's only 10-4, but he's fought some recognizable opponents. So the reason why I just wanted to bring this up is there are some fighters on here that, yeah, I mean, records like 23-16 or 9-8 that, hey, maybe you won't see them. But fighters like Sandra Lavado, I struggle with that, who's 7-1. Some of these fighters that you could see with a few more wins, maybe crack it into the UFC. So it's just interesting to kind of go through and look at some of these cards, check on the results, watch some of the fights that happen, just to get a gauge on maybe what's next on some of these fight cards. Because it happens, you see one of these UFC cards and you scratch your head and go, who is that?
Yeah, all the time.
You look at Brave. They don't really get a big shine. Kind of weird how they kind of morph in with MMAF, and they have that, amateur bit of fights.
Division almost.
Yeah, and then they're somewhat involved with Brave and Bahrain, but still. My point is, Felipe Silva is one of those guys that you might recognize. A half-decent card.
Of course, Shorty Torres in the main event.
Amir Albazi is a guy that a lot of people have talked about in the past. Dean Garnett from the UK. They're Jeremy Pakatu, who has a win over Kevin Lee's brother Keith. Like, there's a lot of recognizable names in some of these cards, and if you get a chance, maybe check them out, especially with Jose Torres taking on Marcel Adour in that main event for the flyweight title. So, interesting stuff there. You've also got ACA. We used to focus a lot on ACB before the merger with WFCA. It's another good card with some recognizable names. If you go up through it pretty quick, Shelton Graves is on there.
Ruslan Magomedov,
Mark Hume, which Rob Emerson, UFC vet, especially with South Africa. Weird the news about EFC that we could have focused on, but not looking like you're going to see many more EFC cards. Ruslan Magomedov, who has
one juicy boy.
He hasn't fought in a long time. His last fight was in the UFC. Had a lot of them booked and they fell out. So I believe he hasn't fought in like 4 years.
USADA.
Brian Foster, UFC vet, on there as well. Daniel Milanchuk, UFC vet, taking on Denis Smoldarev, who's one of the better heavyweights out there, seriously. Yeah. And then in your main, from what we have here, Vitaly Nemchinov taking on Piotr Strus, who he's fought some decent competition in the past as well, if you want to check that out. LFA 78, listen, again, just like I said, some guys that have had some success in South Africa and have competed in LFA. I'm thinking of a guy like Jared Vandera, who we've seen in the past. JP Bai's on there as well. Vernon Lewis taking on Trevon Butler. Vernon Lewis is a guy that I was kind of high on when he was going to fight Rudy Shafroth, and Shafroth able to get a decent win there. In your co-main, Haley Cowan taking on Lisa Malden. That's another one of those ones, especially fighters 4-1, 3-1. Put a couple of wins together, especially in a promotion like LFA.
Exactly.
LFA and Cage Warriors, to me, when you come out of there and you go into the UFC or Bellator, you're the more battle tested and fight ready fighter.
That's a good way of saying it. Like when you see jungle fights and stuff jungle fights isn't a good island fights and stuff like that, like you kind of got to be careful about, even their champions come over to the UFC, you kind of got to be careful and watch their first few performances. But like you said, Cage Warriors guys and LFA guys, the second they come out, and gals, the second they come out of those organizations, you usually know that they're ready for the big organization, whether it be Bellator or UFC, because the settings that and the venues that these organizations put on, like there's not really octagon jitters because they've already been in front of so many people. So yeah, always good to see them transition over into the bigger shows.
And Adrian Yanez taking on Kyle Estrada in your main event, something to pay attention to. You also have one championship card. It's another named one, Age of Dragons. And, some bigger kickboxing fights there in your main and your co-main. Throw in some MMA. Drina Bars on that card as well, recognizable names, something you might check out. But the biggest card over the weekend, UFC Sao Paulo. You can find our 2-minute predictions here on YouTube. We like to pump them up. But the point of this is that we can actually get into some of the prelims. And there's some really good fights on this card. And you can see all the canceled and fizzled bouts. But yeah, walk us through this a little bit, because our first fight's actually really interesting with Cortez and Melo.
So yeah, Tracy Cortez gained a lot of popularity due to her Contender Series performance. She got signed to the UFC through that, facing Vanessa Melo in the first fight. That should be a really fun one at 135. And it seems like women's bantamweight has kind of been stagnant recently. And it hasn't really moved ever since Amanda Nunes became champ.
And Melo's debut was on short notice, and it wasn't a win, but still, this is a good fight for both fighters. They're kind of square one, so to speak. And I'm looking forward to it. The second one, Veronica Macedo, who looked somewhat amazing.
She looked good in her last fight.
She got a really good win. And Ariane Lipsky, who just has not been able to put it together in the UFC.
We were basically her hype men when she came over to the UFC for KSW, and it just hasn't worked out for her so far. Hopefully she can put some sort of a decent performance together, because I feel like the loser of this fight's probably getting cut. So, should be a fun fight, though. Two of the more exciting women in that flyweight division. And then, of course, Renan Barão is fighting a tiny Vitor Belfort in Douglas da Silva de Andrade. And that should be a really fun one. Unfortunately for Renan Barão, he just likes to get knocked out a lot now, and he doesn't really look like the former champion he once was. And he's fighting a guy who doesn't really get the credit he deserves. He lost to Piotr Jan, but other than that, he puts on phenomenal fights, hits extremely hard.
Yeah,
like he has a win over Chito Vera, and that's something that not many people can say. So.
Yeah, he has the look, especially when he has the Belfort hair and the Bret Hart glasses. And yeah, Zubaira Tukhugov, Rob Font, and Piotr Jan, those are pretty decent fighters to lose to.
Exactly.
And a win over Marlon Vera helps quite well. And yeah, you're taking on a guy in Renan Barão who's not even like a litmus test anymore.
I think we can use the word shot. And I don't think that's like being rude or disrespectful to him. I understand he was a great champion at one point, but everyone's run comes to an end at some point. And Renan Barão, whether it be 135 or 145, because he keeps on bouncing between the two divisions, he actually can't even make weight at 135 anymore, the division that he once ruled at. So it's just really unfortunate to kind of see where his career's gone in recent years. Hopefully, it would be nice if he could pick up a win and, win in front of his home crowd. And maybe go out on a win, but I just don't see it happening. I think Douglas Andrade should probably get TKO.
A couple of guys that can finish fights. You got Rude Boy Randy Brown taking on Warley Alves. And you look at Alves, he fought Colby Covington.
He did. I really thought that Randy Brown was going to get a more high-profile opponent after he knocked out Brian Barberena in his last fight. He looked phenomenal in that. Brian Barberena was coming off, at the time, the fight of the year against Vicente Luque.
Yeah.
So you thought, okay, well, if Luque was able to knock out Barberena, and then Randy Brown was able to knock out Barberena easier than Luque was, Rude Boy's got to be in for a big fight next, but he didn't really get that. He gets Warley Alves, who hasn't really looked all that great recently. Like you said, though, he is a finisher. If he gets your neck, if you go for a bad takedown, he will choke you unconscious. Rude Boy does fight somewhat similar to Colby Covington. I say he's like the knockoff Colby Covington. He doesn't do anything as well as of yet. He's still developing talent. But in this fight, unless he goes for some sort of lazy takedown and gets guillotined, I think it should be a pretty easy win for Randy Brown.
And I think Warley Alves can get the win there.
Fair enough. And the next one, though, I really want to talk about this because Bobby Green seems to retire after every single fight now. And Francisco Trinaldo kind of got screwed over by the judges in his last fight. He fought
Alexander Hernandez.
Thank you. Alexander Hernandez in Alexander Hernandez's hometown, which isn't good. And Francisco Trinaldo, I thought, won that fight quite comfortably. I was extremely surprised when they didn't give him.
It's just weird how he's so old at 155, and I say so old, he's above 40, but he still puts on really good performances, and Bobby Green has had so many wars, you just have to wonder if the forward pressure from Trinaldo is going to be able to get it done, and
I would think Trinaldo would win a fight here, but
even in Bobby Green's last fight, like these are two guys coming off fights that I truly believe that they should have won, even though the judges didn't give them to them. Bobby Green's last fight was against Jakar Close, who I thought he had won 2 of the 3 rounds quite comfortably, and they still didn't give it to him. So it'll be really interesting because you know that both guys coming off decisions that they both probably should have won. They're going to want to finish this fight. And especially Bobby Green fighting in the hometown of his opponent.
If you look up at the next fight, I mean, Eduardo Garagori taking on Ricardo Ramos, and we ragged on Luis Eduardo Garagori, and listen, his record was padded. He was 12-0 coming to the UFC, and he looked amazing. And he's going to be taking on Ricardo Ramos, who only has the 1 loss in the UFC, and yeah, it's just tough because he looked like a force at bantamweight. He was finishing people, spinning elbows and whatnot. But I just wonder, this is a weird fight. It's weird. A really weird fight.
I know Ricardo Ramos has had finishes in the past, but he doesn't seem to be, like, he's not a big volume guy, and he doesn't have big power. He just kind of is awkward enough striking to sort of stifle anyone's attack who's coming at him. His grappling is quite good. He's got a lot of good guillotines and submission skills, but his wrestling's not all that great. So it's interesting to see him.
Garagori's going to have a size advantage in this fight.
Oh, and quite comfortable one, too. I mean, Ricardo Ramos is quite thin for the division, so it will be really interesting seeing him fight at 145, too. And not
you move forward, you've got the James Krause taking on Sergio Moraes. Moraes kind of, he's sputtering of late, and he's one of those guys like IBJJF champ, like, you know how good his jiu-jitsu is, but you don't see it anymore. No, like, you haven't seen it in his last two
last
fights.
time we saw his jiu-jitsu was against Gilbert Burns in a strict jiu-jitsu competition. Gilbert Burns choked him out. So James Krause is weird, though, because he is really good, and he puts on good performances, but he never fights. He'll fight like once a year, and then he coaches for the rest of it.
Yeah, because he's a great coach.
Exactly, and that's the thing. So a great mind behind the sport. And it would, like, even if James Krause decided one day, okay, I don't want to fight anymore, I just want to coach, he would be great at that, because you see a lot of guys who he's in the corner of have really good success in MMA, not just in the UFC. So it should be a good fight. James Krause coming off his last win, he knocked out Warley Alves with that kind of awkward knee that he hit him with. It'll be interesting to see him fight another guy who fights very similar to Warley Alves, very similar skill sets between the two. I do think James Krause can be able to win that fight, especially with the way Sergio Moraes has looked as of late. But really good prelims all in all. A lot of really fun fights, and a lot of them that could be fighted there. I mean, I personally think Francisco Trinaldo, Bobby Green has a very good chance of just becoming this crazy brawl. So, yeah, should be a really good card no matter what.
And, I mean, if we just rip through the main card quick, I'd taken Turman against Perez. Matt has Perez. Matt has Arroyo, and I have Muniz. I have Oliveira. You have Oliveira. We're both taking Paul Craig as an underdog on short notice in the co-main event as Matt sneezes. And then we both have Blachowicz in the main event.
I'm going to go as far as to say Blachowicz by stoppage. I think he knocks him out.
I think Blachowicz can get it done under 3 rounds. But it should be a good fight. We're really looking forward to it. And listen, I mean, it's a great weekend of fights. We had great fights this past weekend. We hit it into the Twitter purge. We talked about some uncomfortable topics that came out of NEF 41. You can check out those live results over on the website, fightingpicks.net. I'm going to post some of the pictures that I took there. Just add that little watermark in there and post them under all the fights, because I sit there, I type my notes, I sit there, I take my pictures, I type some more, and then after the fact, I kind of have, my editing session with pictures, post those, and it's always good, the fighters can check them out and share them around if they want to. But yeah, there was a lot of stuff that we covered this past week.
We really did. This show went a lot longer.
We went further than we meant, but it's always good to go in depth and talk about some of those fights, especially the ones that, like your Fusion Fight Championships that might just fly under the radar, and maybe you check it out, you find a fighter to rally around, and then you see them in the UFC.
And that's the nice thing about Fight Pass, at least in Canada. There's so many organizations that get streamed on there, so no matter what time of the day, what time of the week it is, there's usually some sort of combat sport being shown on there. So it's always good to just check it out, no matter what day it is, just to try to see new fighters and new up-and-comers that could be in the UFC one day. So
be sure to check out those 2-minute predictions for UFC São Paulo. We're going to be coming at you all week with different things. But really looking forward to the week that's coming up in MMA. Don't forget, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FMP, at Matt Allen FMP. And Matt, we'll check you again next week.